There was some recent reporting out of the Athletic this earlier this week around Vera Pauw, the Ireland national team coach, reporting from Steph Young and Sarah Separate out of the Athletic, referring to allegations essentially of a culture of fear. Stemming from the 2018 season in NWSL with Vera Pauw as she was head coach of the Houston Dash. And it was another one of those tough reads, Lisa. I'm not
Mhm.
going to lie. When I saw the report drop, I was like, okay, let's take a look at this and see where it is, because we're talking about something that happened 5 or so years ago at this point. And you're always curious about what's going to come out of these things. And I think the biggest takeaway for me within this reporting was that so many of the sources within this who found themselves essentially victims of Paw during her time with Houston Dash in 2018, they all felt the importance of being anonymous in this
Yeah.
piece, whether they were a player, a former player, or a former staff member of Pause, just for their overall protection and safety moving forward. So they were referred to as staffer A, B, or C, or player A, B, and C. And that was really the biggest, most glaring thing for me, that here we are years later, and we're coming off of a couple of years here where there has been extensive work in terms of like the other allegations and other reports and other investigations that have taken place, whether it was via U.S. Soccer and the Sally Yates investigation or the NWSL and Players Association joint team investigation, that at this point in year 11 of NWSL, there's all of these protocols and policies in place moving forward. So to have like kind of this flashback into a certain era of NWSL, it kind of takes you into a place where wasn't too long ago. But you're hopeful, and that some of the current culture around clubs in the league kind of maybe pave the way for former players or former staffers to try to share their experiences and stories,
Mhm.
even within remaining anonymous for their protection.
Yeah, very interesting kind of all this coming out from The Athletic, as you mentioned, and really the allegations, I mean, in the article written, on The Athletic, by Steph Yang and Sarah Shepard, they did a great job, but I think it's really important that they included a lot of quotes from their sources. Now, as you mentioned, Sandra, none of the sources are named, out of fear, but the quotes are really interesting to me. One former player saying that Paul was, quote, the most terrible coach I've ever had, saying that she would comment on players' weight and appearance. Another player saying we were all afraid of her because we had no idea what she was going to do day to day. Vera was the worst, most terrible coach I've ever had. Mentally, it was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this with her. Another player saying, I hated going to practice. I was miserable. If I had another year like that, I would not be playing professional soccer anymore. Another quote, everybody had their own coaching style. I get it, but it was, in my opinion, abusive and inappropriate, belittling in such a public matter. So those are just some of the examples of what the players were reported for Paul, and kind of how she ended up coaching throughout the NWSL. And as you mentioned, this was a couple years ago, 2018, when she was with Houston Dash. It was just 1 year. And otherwise, she had coached nations before
Yeah.
that, right? International, Scotland, Netherlands, Russia. She was with South Africa. She spent 1 year in Houston. But now, after being with Houston for 2018, starting in 2019, Vera Pauw went on to coach the Republic of Ireland, and ultimately, to be frank, led them to their first World Cup, which is set to kick off in about 2 weeks from today. So now that's where she is. Vera Pauw is the head manager of the Republic of Ireland, headed to the World Cup. And as it's why it's pretty timely that these accusations are coming out about her time in Houston, although several years ago in 2018, why it's relevant now, because she is still coaching at the international level for Ireland.
Yeah, and I thought, look, shout out to Steph Yang. I thought it was important or a good point that she made a note within, her tweeting the story out about it, directly addressing that, saying, if you're wondering why we're
Yeah.
investigating this now, that it was Paul who actually approached The Athletic this year in April of 2023 about, quote, protecting coaches from players, given previous complaints in the NWSLPA joint investigation. That's why they felt the need to go back to former Dash players and staff, and that it was 7 of them in total that agreed to
Mhm.
talk with The Athletic about Pauw and varying allegations. So that also was something that kind of just popped out to me. I was like, wow, like just the gall that um someone with so many allegations around them
Yeah.
can have to say, you know what, how about you go and protect coaches within this. And so they were like, okay, well, let's open this up then and talk about it and report it and investigate on it and then report it. And that was very hard for me to sort of consume
Mhm.
within this story as well, because I just couldn't help but feel like there was a lot of turning of things around on players. It just, there were
Right.
stretches of the
Yeah.
reporting where it felt like victim blaming. So that was a very difficult thing for me to read. So I would, if folks are just hearing about it for the first time with us talking about it on A3, and you subscribe to The Athletic and go and read it, just those are your trigger warnings, I guess, for me, as someone who took a look at the reporting when it dropped. But I think you're spot on about it in terms of connecting it to what it means right now in present day, that she's the current head coach of another national team now. She has been for quite some time, and they're, yes, have made some history already together. They're going to be debutantes in this upcoming World Cup. But you have to wonder if this is going to be one of those things where maybe it's an outside factor, and perhaps it's something that Pauw, maybe not the players, but is Pauw going to be distracted by something like
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to be distracted by something like this. Even some of the players that are on her Ireland national team that read this article, whether they have experience with this or they don't, it's just kind of interesting that it comes up right now as these players are preparing for the biggest moment in their lives, right? At this point, going to the World Cup. But yeah, I think in the article, it's definitely a great read. Go check it out. It is interesting how she kind of does turn it back on the players and say that they're the ones that created the hostile environment for her. And that it was an agenda from the players to make her life not great as a coach there. But yeah, I mean, ultimately the allegations and accusations saying that Pauw was considered to be abusive, detrimental to their performance, and overall inappropriate as a coach, which is interesting that this comes out of the NWSL after just a year and a half ago when the Players Association and the players took it in their own hands, Kaya McCullough and Mana Shim and Shanique Farley, to kind of bring light to a lot of the different abusive situations that the players had faced throughout the NWSL. And now that it's kind of coming full circle again as they circle back on a female coach in the
Yeah.
league, right? I think that's also something to kind of point out, and that it is still possible that it doesn't have to be a male coach,
Yeah.
and anything can happen.
Which is such a, it's almost a funny point to even bring up as I hear you mention it, because also within the article, this Vera Pauw and her constant referencing of Pep Guardiola
Yeah,
and like, like talking about like, oh, if I was coaching in this manner as a male coach, like it wouldn't be considered this way, like trying to point out a sexism essentially and a double standard. Um, but again, at the same time, as someone just reading it, I was just kind of like, wow, that again, the goal to just sort of compare yourself to someone like a Guardiola. I was like, okay, this is getting a little too much, and just reading it again, there were parts of it that make you uncomfortable sometimes, which is why I was like, let's make sure that we let the folks know that if they decide to go read it, there might be some stretches of that are uncomfortable. And yeah, no, it's important to sort of bring all those things full circle and kind of connect those dots. I mean, Sinead Farrelly got named to this Ireland roster,
yep,
and I think that's the other takeaway that I would come from this, that I would not want to see something like this bombard those players. Sinead Farrelly has had a remarkable comeback and a remarkable story that's still going on because she's about to go to a World Cup. And you just don't want to see players have to answer for other people's actions,
yeah,
or allegations of that sort. So I'm hopeful that the media who continue to cover this in the World Cup can continue to be mindful of that, and allow players to
Yeah.
just go and compete in the World Cup.
Yeah, as they have to focus on what's next for them, and like I said, the biggest tournament of their entire lives. Houston Dash and the NWSL did put out a statement apologizing to players past and present who were subject to misconduct by Pauw, saying that they apologize for anything that they did. So interesting that kind of came out from them. Nothing from NWSL Players Association on their social media. But I think it's more all eyes are. She's not in the NWSL anymore. That's like a matter of fact. So there's not much that like the league can do at this point in terms of actually punishing Pauw. But now the fact that she goes forth, she starts on July 20th with Ireland against hosts Australia in the World Cup. Playing away, playing against the host nation. It's going to be an uphill battle for Vera Pauw for the Irish side going into this World Cup, and that's really the next page that these players have to turn to and focus on moving forward.